Hello and welcome to another episode of SportsDay Rangers. I'm John Blake.
And I'm Evan Grant.
So the Rangers have just finished a 9-game homestand, going 4-5. They enter the month of May with a 15-16 record. They're in third place, but just a game and a half behind the A's. And then the Mariners, now playing well, have kind of creeped up there. And Evan, as we talk through this podcast, we're going to have Kevin Mench on. It's the 20th anniversary, and you know how I love anniversaries, of Kevin Mench's historic 7-game home run streak back in 2006. And then we're going to look at some of the earliest firings in Rangers, earliest managerial changes, I should say, in Rangers history, those occurring in May. No April, like the Phillies and the Red Sox. So
some really upbeat stuff to talk about, the firings.
Right.
All the firings.
Changes. Let's put it that way. So let's get right at it here. For you,
spoken like a master of spin.
Yes.
Changes.
So we're through the month of April. The team is 15-16, and looking at this from a big picture now, you're a great big picture guy. What are your expectations about? You may not have gotten to this place where you thought that how they were going to do it, but are the expectations about what you thought?
Look, I think, John, in my preseason schedule analysis where I predict the monthly records each month, I had them going 16-15. And from my perspective, they're a 1-run loss against the A's in which they wasted a bunch of late opportunities away from that. So I think by and large on the record part, they've very much done what needed to be done. They've survived April record wise. The important thing was to not get buried. But I think there were at least 2 significant developments that I think long term potentially pay dividends for the Rangers. And that is, you know, we can break down all the offensive struggles, and there have been some offensive struggles, but Josh Jung is playing the best baseball of his career. It's not just a weak hot streak, and we've seen some weak hot streaks over the past couple of years. You know, he was playing at an all-star level in the first half of 2023, and he surpassed that in April. This is the best month that he's ever had. His chase rate is way down. He's doing what hitters need to do in Globe Life Field, which is use the big part of the park. Hit the ball into the gaps, you know, hit line drives. Don't worry about hitting home runs. And so I think that's a huge development for this team because this was a big year. Josh Jung was on the clock going into this year. I think both he and Jake Berger were in that situation. I think Jake's got some stuff that he's got to work on here as we go forward. But, you know, I think over the last 25 games, Josh has been 9 walks and 9 strikeouts. You know, the strikeout numbers are way down. But for me, the fact that he's taking walks means he's contributing even when he's not getting hits. I think he's got a higher on-base percentage at the end of April than Brandon Nimmo does. And we all know what Brandon Nimmo has done for the club. The second thing for me that really stands out is I think that Skip Schumacher has, despite a number of injuries in the bullpen, found usable pieces for the back of the bullpen. Jake Latz has done a remarkable job. And I think what we heard on Thursday or on Wednesday was Skip all but saying Jake Latz is his 9th inning guy now. He put some qualifiers on there, but he definitely talked about Jake as his 9th inning guy. And a 6-out save against the Yankees when you've got to face Judge is no easy task, right?
It's not.
And then, you know, you in the bullpen, you have to have some surprises, and the Rangers needed to have some surprises. Gavin Collier has come in. I don't know that Gavin Collier is going to get really super high leverage innings, but he's come in and done the job. And Peyton Gray throws strikes, has a really plush changeup, and he's a guy who can give the Rangers some innings when they need it. So I think the Rangers have had some really positive developments in 2 big areas that were question marks. What are they going to do in the bullpen? And is Josh Jung going to really take a step forward?
Well, before we talk a little bit about the offense, which is on everybody's mind, let's look at the starting pitching a little bit over the first month. And Nathan Eovaldi came out on Wednesday and I think calmed a lot of people's nerves there. Pitched really well, shutout baseball for 7 innings against a tough New York Yankees lineup. No walks, no home runs. What do you, as you look at that rotation, it's, again, like we had last year, you've got 5 pretty strong guys. You'd like to probably have them extend a little longer. The innings are not what you want on innings per start, but that can come. But also a really positive development over the first 31 games.
Well, I think the big thing for me watching Nathan yesterday was the fact that he has, for a guy who's got such a great pitching repertoire, he's made one of his pitches all but disappear, and it's the most traditional of all of them, the four-seam fastball.
Right.
I think he threw 8, or StatCast had him at 10 four-seam fastballs, and he's using the four-seam fastball less than he's ever had in the past. And to the point now, Nick Kurtz's home run was on a first pitch four-seam fastball against Sacramento. So was Tyler Soderstrom's first home run. And I think that Nathan is now, yesterday he threw 2 first pitch four-seam fastballs to hitters. I think he has realized you can't just get him over strikes to guys anymore. And so he's using that vast array that he's got of pitches to be very much more unpredictable, even in the most predictable of situations. So I think that Nathan has made the adjustments that he needs to make. He talked a little bit about getting better extension on his splitter yesterday, and certainly it played really, really well. I think it has been, and I've latched onto this word. I don't think Chris Jung meant it in a derogatory or diminishing way, but he said before the season that it wouldn't be surprising if there was some regression from Eovaldi and DeGrom. Basically because you can't expect those guys to pitch Cy Young caliber baseball every year.
And they're getting older every year. There's more innings on those arms. So.
And they are. But, Jacob DeGrom so far has been magnificent. And even as he hasn't felt well, all throughout April in terms of, not physically, but he hasn't felt well in terms of where his pitches are. But his pitches grade out spectacularly. Nathan Eovaldi, I think, again, this is a guy that as long as he's got stuff, and Nathan has stuff, I think he's always going to find a way to figure it out because he's so forward-thinking and so kind of ahead of the game in that regard. The question is, in April, there were shorter outings, and I think some of that was as these guys were getting back into the season, but I also think Skip and the staff were going to protect these guys in April. You've got 2 guys who are age 35 or older, and you do need to protect them a little bit. And I think as we get into the season, now they will get to pitch a little bit more. Nate got 102 pitches yesterday. So I think the Rangers are April was going to be a month of governance, so to speak.
And we'll see what happens next week because DeGrom and Eovaldi are going to have to go into Yankee Stadium and do it all again. But on this road trip, because Rangers go to Detroit and then New York as this schedule continues. Well, let's examine this offensive conundrum a little bit. You've talked about Josh Jung, mentioned Brandon Nimmo, who it looks like he's going to be okay at this point. The hamstring, he tweaked a little bit yesterday, but I saw where he said post-game he's hoping he'll be ready for Friday.
He used lots of words that you would have been happy with. He had a lot of technical words. He talked about the fascia. He talked about
I saw that, right.
He mentioned fascia about 4 times afterwards. But look, this is who Brandon is. He's very detailed, and the fascia obviously is the thin layer of skin that kind of wraps around the hamstring. And he said he's had some issues where that's gotten irritated in the last 3-4 years, had some hamstring issues early in his career, but this guy knows his body and he knows what to do when he starts to feel wrong. And so he said, you come out, you get it rested, he'll get some extra treatment that he needs to get, he'll do some maintenance stuff for it, but he says he does not anticipate missing any time. And I take him at his word considering he's played 150 or more games each of the last 4 years. For me, John, I think the big thing in the offense is whether Globe Life Field is a physical issue or not. I think it has become a mental issue for the Rangers. And there were some numbers that I cited earlier this week about the club's chase rate at home versus chase rate on the road.
Yeah,
And they are
pretty
startling.
dramatic. Yeah,
Yeah.
pretty dramatic. Yes, they are. And again, coming off now this 9-game homestand, it becomes even a bigger issue because you've seen this now over a fairly significant period of games, right?
Yeah, and look, I mean, I think there's some calculus that has built up, right? There's some calcification over the past 2 years. This offense hasn't performed. They did perform better at home than they did on the road last year, and so it's good to see the improvement on the road. But I do think that in some of these hitters, whether they're going to acknowledge it or not, it has built up some degree of a mental anxiety or something about hitting it home, trying to do too much, I think is the way Skip Schumacher referenced it. And listen, I mean, when you're chasing more pitches outside of the zone so dramatically in one place versus the other, I do think it suggests that, you've got something built up inside that makes you more anxious at the plate.
And that kind of brings us, because the numbers on Corey Seager are very dramatic. And again, the Rangers have faced a lot of tough pitching, a lot of tough left-handed pitching. But what do you see out of Seager right now? And his adjustments. He's such a disciplined guy, and this has to be tough.
Yeah, and Corey doesn't say much about any of this stuff. He doesn't really like to talk about it, but he took accountability and said, I've got to do a better job. I've got to get hits, but he's never going to reveal the process, right? He's never going to reveal what he thinks he's doing is wrong. And all I can say is that you got through April with Corey Seager hitting 207, and a 722 OPS, which is league average, but it's 140 points below his career lines. And the numbers suggest that this is a guy who is an 860 OPS guy for his career. And even if he has an off year full over the course of the year, if he just performs to his career norms the rest of the way, you're talking about an 860. You're a 500 team going into May with a guy who's going to give you an 860 OPS the rest of the season, and that's pretty impressive. And it's very possible that Corey will rectify all this and go on one of those heaters that will make up some of that disparity too. So I think the fact that they've gotten through this and not gotten buried by the fact that Corey hasn't been great, again, speaks positively, because I don't have answers on why he's going to get better, but I do feel like, given his track record and given who he is, he's going to be better than this the rest of the way, and that's only going to make the offense better.
Does the lack of power, and it's pretty apparent. You had a tweet during the Yankee series where the opponents at that point had hit 15 home runs at Globe Life Field. The Rangers had 6. This club obviously is not going to slug 200 and plus 50 home runs, and again, Berger, Peterson, guys like that you were expecting probably more power from at this juncture, and Langford being hurt. But does that alarm you at all, or can this team win without that real power burst?
Look, all I can say is, Josh Jung has made adjustments. We hope that they remain in place all year to his game, and he's been a very successful hitter. You would like to think that other guys could do the same. The problem on Jake Berger is when he doesn't hit, when he doesn't slug, and everybody's going to go through periods where they hit a dry spell, he doesn't walk. And because of that, it becomes an absolute zero in the lineup. You look at Jock Peterson, he's not slugging, but he is getting on base. I think his on base percentage is like at 360 right now. It's a very robust on base percentage. So I don't know. I mean, Jake is going to have to make some adjustments to find a way to get on base when he's not absolutely on a hot streak. I think Jock is doing what he needs to do. Would you love more slug? Yeah, but I'll take 360 on base percentage from him all day. Second base has been an issue, but we're seeing right now, I think, again, Skip gave Josh Smith a month. He's giving Josh Smith, as he said, several days off. The first of those off days Ezekiel Duran reached base 3 times. He's now hitting
Yep.
290 with a 780 OPS.
Right. Hit the ball hard, too. Hitting the ball hard, too.
Yeah, and he's hitting the ball in the gaps. Again,
Right.
what you need to do in this ballpark. So I think that he's going to get a chance to maybe seize that job, and maybe that becomes a more productive position. I don't think this team is going to average 2.6 runs a game at home all year. That's all I can say. Seager's going to get better. Langford's going to be in the lineup. You'd like to think that Berger will tone down the swing and miss versus the lack of walk rate a little bit. And I do think the other thing I looked up this morning is, I think Danny Jansen's gotten a little bit of heat for a low OPS in April. It was 627. It's actually the best April he's ever had. He's a terrible April hitter. And he's a really strong second half player. He's a 687 OPS guy in the first half, 783 in the second half. So I think Danny Jansen is shown career long that as the season progresses, he gets better. So the fact that he got through April, I think, is a good sign, again, without this team getting buried.
So just to wrap this up, Skip Schumacher now, 31 games in as Rangers manager. How do you think he's kind of handled the ups and downs and everything over this first month?
Well, he hasn't gotten fired. I mean, that's that seems to be a topic in baseball.
Yeah,
look,
exactly.
I mean, I'm really impressed with Skip. There's no other way for me to say it. I think that all his answers are well thought out. There have been a couple times during the course of the month where I've asked what would be labeled as second guess questions, and he's used those opportunities exactly as I'd hope a manager would, to just explain his thinking. And in some cases, when he felt like he made a mistake, he took accountability. He took accountability for having a bad pitching matchup for Cole Winn against Shea Langoliers. He took accountability on Tuesday night for having Jock Peterson bunt, even though
right.
I didn't think it was a terrible play in that situation. They weren't.
Pitcher had to make a great play to throw him out at third base to get the force.
Yes, and I mean, there's so many different facets that go into that. I tweeted yesterday also, Josh Jung didn't get a great secondary lead at second base on that,
Right.
and so it maybe he's safe, and now you've got bases loaded. Jock had struck out twice in his only 2 appearances against Cruz. The other thing that I liked was the fact that I liked their chances of getting 1 hit to tie the game, a single to tie the game, more than 2 hits with runners on first and second and needing 2 hits to tie the game based on the way things were going. So it didn't work out, and that was unfortunate for the Rangers, but I think they've used the bunt this year. Most of the time that they've used the bunt, I think if you go back and look, and I need to look at this, but I think they've ended up with multi-inning runs. That was one that backfired. But I think that what I've seen from Skip in terms of how he thinks about the game, how he answers questions, how steady he appears to be, it's really impressive. And the one other thing that I really like is, again, he doesn't take the old manager's pose, right? He hits ground balls because he wants to be in the fight with his coaches. He throws BP, first group every day, and then he goes out in the outfield and he walks the outfield to talk to some players to continue conversations. So I think one of the first part of his managerial motto, CAPE. The first letter C in that acronym is communication. I see it. I see alignment. I see him being, in the group with his coaches, but I also see his coaches having much more. I feel like the coaching staff is much more in motion than I'm used to with the Rangers over the past, I don't know, almost a decade. It feels like. So I do think that what he laid out, he's executing. Now, whether or not that amounts to a 90-win season this year, I don't know. But I think that what the Rangers have asked him to do and what he has announced that he will do, he's done that to a T.
Well, it was 20 years ago that a Ranger outfielder set a major league record for consecutive games hitting a home run by a right-handed batter. It was Kevin Mench, and we'll talk to him next on this week's episode of Sports Day Rangers. Well, we're pleased to have with us on our Sports Day Rangers podcast this week former Rangers outfielder Kevin Mench, and we're in the midst of the 20th anniversary of a record that still stands. When Kevin hit home runs in 7 straight games from April 21st to the 28th, 2006. That is still the record, tied for the record, I should say, for a right-handed batter in Major League history, tied with Mike Trout, who did it in 2022. The overall record is 8, shared by Dale Long, New Phillies manager Don Mattingly, who actually did it in the last 3 games of that streak, was in Arlington, and then Ken Griffey Jr. later on. So, Kevin, welcome. And Evan was there during that streak, covering the team. I was actually working for the Red Sox. But I've got some specifics here, but what do you remember about that week in April of 2006?
You know, I never thought about a lot of it until after what led up to it. I just had the injection in my toe. Remember the whole shoe incident? So I fly back to Texas, get the injection meister, fly to Seattle. I think we had a night game in Seattle, if I'm correct, and then we flew back, and I think I started to streak the next day. I hit a ball in Seattle, I think off the top of the wall. I missed going out by like 4 or 5 inches. I think Nevin ended up on third, and I think my bat broke, and I think the streak started the next day. And I never really even thought about any of it. I was just going out, just trying to do my job. The biggest thing I could deal with was the media wouldn't leave me alone, right, Evan?
Mench, you were a good quote, so we were always looking for you to do something.
No, I remember the media coming up and saying, hey, what are your thoughts? I said, I'll be glad when this is over, so you guys leave me alone.
No, you weren't. You weren't going to be glad when it was over. You wanted to set a record.
I didn't think about it. We go into Cleveland. In hindsight, that Saturday night, I think about, okay, maybe should have swung at this pitch or that pitch. But we were trying to win baseball games. I wasn't worried about some record.
Well, let's talk about it a little bit specifically to see what you remember here. So the first 3 games were against Tampa Bay at home, and you started it off with a first-inning grand slam against Seth McClung on the 21st, and then homered in the second inning off Edwin Jackson the next night, and then finished off the Rays series with a third-inning homer against Casey Fossum. So all real early games. And the Rangers swept the Rays in that series. And first 2 of those were go-ahead home runs.
Yeah, I don't know when it took place in the game. I was just trying to do what I like to do, is hit the ball as hard as I can, as far as I can hit it.
That sounds about like your answer. Let's go back just a little bit. And what was the whole shoe incident again? I think everybody needs to be reminded of the shoe incident.
So, growing up, my parents always tried to jam me in a size 12 shoe, because anything over that, you had to go a full size. So a 13 would have been too big for me growing up. So I was in a 12. Your feet grow a little bit. I didn't know anything about shoes. Who thinks about their feet growing up? So,
well, a lot of people, but let's move on.
I do now. I do now. I think about a lot of it because, back and knee and hip issues and everything else. I think about what I wear all the time. So, I think what had happened was we were in Tampa. I was running to first base. I can remember stepping on the bag and feeling a pop in my toe, and I had no idea what it was. I think I probably went in and said something to Jamie or Ray, and went with it from there. And then I think I ended up getting some injections in the toe before games that would wear off about the 7th inning, and it would just start just throbbing. You hear about, I remember growing up, you hear about football players got turf toe. I go, really? What is turf toe? You've got to be a big wuss to be dealing with turf toe, and understood what it actually meant. Those guys without, it usually happens on the big toe. Mine happened on the second toe, which they don't, it's never,
and this never compromised you for your speed or anything? You never, until 2006, you felt it?
Yeah, nothing. Never even thought about it. I think at that age, John, you don't think about much. You just go about your business and do things. But like I said, now I do. I think about it. With what I wear, I make sure now that I get half sizes. I'm not jamming my foot in a 12 anymore. But
I guess we didn't have a teen podiatrist in those days either, probably.
actually, we did. It was John Crates.
Well, that's right. Yes, we
Yeah,
did.
yeah. And I went to see John, and he sports. I think USA Today did an article on it, and it was in his office. And he goes, "Look, Mitch, you put me on the map." And I remember him when I went in there one day. He showed me and we were good friends up until his passing a few years ago.
Yeah, he was a good guy. So,
Yes.
so you then homered 3 straight against Oakland, 3 straight games. Second inning off Joe Blanton, third inning off Barry Zito, who was a great pitcher, obviously, at that time. And then a grand slam off Kiko Calero, and the streak is at 6 games. And this is for both Evan and you, Minchie. When did this really start to become, again, I was with the Red Sox, so I can't, we were going through a lousy season in 2006. But when did this really start to rise up and become a thing?
No, I never thought about any of it until I think when I tied the record. I guess Frank Howard had the Nationals, Senators record at the time. I think the 5th game, and that was it. I think it was the only time it was really mentioned. And then after that, it was just the fact of the media being there. Hey, you did it again. I'm like, oh, okay. And then we had an off day going into Cleveland. I think we had an off day on Thursday, if I'm correct. And then I picked the streak up again on Friday.
Evan, were you on all those? Were you at all those games?
I don't know if I was at every one of them, but the thing that was, John, and Kevin, the thing that I'm remembering now about early in the 2006 season wasn't so much Menchie's home run streak, but there was a lot of what's the right word? There was a lot of intrigue around the club. I do remember that at one point in time, right at the beginning of Menchie's streak, actually, we were facing the Rays, and there was a power struggle between the manager at that time, Buck Showalter, and the first-year GM, John Daniels, over a Rule 5 pick that the Rangers had taken, named Fabio Castro. And at one point in time in that early in April, Buck said to me, "Watch who gets up and sits back down in the bullpen." And it became basically a phantom DL. And so there was a lot of intrigue around that. Not to mention that we were all getting used to whatever the Vicente Padilla dynamic was. I think that was the first year of Padilla on the roster. So some of that stuff kind of got overlooked. But I think as we got to about 5 games, it started to become something that we were all very aware of. And then clearly with the chance to tie the major league record as the end of April dawned on us, it was something that was a big story.
So you tie you go for number 7, which ties the record for what at the time set a record for a right-handed hitter on the 28th at Cleveland, and this one went all the way to the 8th inning when you finally hit a solo homer off Guillermo Mota.
Yeah, I like I said, still was not thinking about a streak at that point. I think with that time of the game, I think we were down maybe 2 runs, and I put us within 1, and I don't remember much after that. But like I said, it was never about a streak, trying to break a record or anything else. But just when they mentioned it at 5, when Frank Howard had said it, I remember doing a little history on Frank Howard. I never got a chance to watch Frank. He played in the 70s. Growing up, I wasn't born yet, but just hearing it and seeing what kind of a man he was as far as an imposing player that could take up the entire batter's box and also hit it across state lines.
So, and then the next day, Fausto Carmona started for the Indians at the time, called the Indians obviously at the time, and that was the end. Did you have any feelings or whatever for the ending of this streak?
Not at all. I didn't think about it, like I said, at all. But that, after, a few weeks later, maybe I probably could have swung at this. But at this point, we're trying to win baseball games. I wasn't chasing records. I wasn't trying to do all that. I never played the game for myself. Played it for trying to win. That was the biggest thing. Is how I was taught to play the game.
So that 8th game, you went 1 for 3. You did have a sac fly in the first inning to score Teixeira. I'm trying to look at your other at-bats here to see what happened in that game. You struck out in the fourth, looking. And then you singled to right. And so your last at-bat that game comes in. That may have been your last at-bat. Yeah, so that was it. You didn't get a chance for a fourth at-bat that night.
Fausto Carmona was the guy that changed his name too, right?
To Roberto Hernandez, yeah.
Yeah.
I
Really?
take that back. The seventh inning, you struck out looking again. So it was, and you didn't get a chance at a fifth at bat that night. The Rangers kind of went down in order in the ninth. Michael Jung, Mark Teixeira, Phil Nevin, all made outs, and that was the end of the streak. And listen, it was. Did you end up player of the week that week?
Yes, you
Co-player of the
did.
week.
I
I
looked
got
up
co-player
that.
of the week.
Yeah, co-player.
With who?
Yes, because no idea. I have the watch that they sent me for that. It's funny. I only ever been got co-player of the week twice. I did it once in college for a weekend. I hit 8 home runs in a weekend. The guy that I tied, the co-player of the week, had 9 on the year, and I got co-player of the week. And then I got co-player of the week in the major with who was it? You could probably dig it up, Evan or John, and find out. But I did. I got
Wasn't
co-player of the
Fausto
week.
Carmona, was it? No, I'm just kidding.
No. Evan's going to do a little research.
I'm going to try.
While Evan does a little research, let's talk a little bit more about that 2006 season, because I remember. So 2 weeks later, the Rangers came to Boston, and this was, Evan, I think you were on this trip. It was a May series, mid-May, and the weather was terrible in Boston. We played one of the 3 games, and the Rangers had to actually come back to the next time they were there. I remember seeing Menchie walking in or something, and I was in the tunnel going into the rain, and I asked him how things were going, and he said something to the effect that he wasn't sure how much longer he was going to be a Texas Ranger. And at that point, you talk about the intrigue, Evan. Things were going kind of sideways at the time, right?
It had really started to go sideways in 05. In the second half of the season, I feel like there was, and we've talked a little bit about this on the podcast, there was a meeting in Cleveland, I recall, where a bunch of players were really upset with the direction of the club. And I think then player development director Dom Cheedy came in. Do you remember this meeting, Menchie?
I think vaguely, yes.
And there were some upset players. Michael Jung was upset. Mark Teixeira was upset. And they wanted to know where this club was going. And I think that only continued to boil over the winter. And then the Rangers weren't terribly aggressive in the offseason. And then it really did. I think there was some degree of a power struggle between Buck, who thought that once John Hart was gone and he had a 28-year-old GM, that he was going to have really control of the organization. And I think John Daniels wanted it very much to be a traditional situation where he was the GM and Buck was the manager. And so it only lasted the remainder of that year. But yeah, it was John, you were an unfortunate victim in that whole power struggle in 04. And
I got a World Series ring in 2007. I can't really complain.
And Menchie, that was your last year with the Rangers, right? 06?
You got traded, and I was going to say you got traded in the end of July with 2 other guys, Lance Nix and Coco Cordero, who had been part of the previous regime for Carlos Lee and Nelson Cruz. But as the trade deadline approached, did you have a pretty good feeling you might be going somewhere else, or was it a surprise?
It was a surprise. I mean, you hear stories. People say, you're going to go. This is going to happen. This and that. And I, through the years, you've learned just to, if it happens, it happens. There was no point to even sit there and wonder about things. They say when you don't hear things is when usually stuff happens. So you're always hearing things, but how much of it's true, right? People say what they say one thing, and what they do is another. So it was definitely different. I got the 50,000th hit in team history, and then I got traded the next day.
1 or 2 days later. That's right.
Thank you for your service. But at that point in time, the Milwaukee Brewers GM was one Doug Melvin, and he was happy to pick up all the former Rangers that he and his group had drafted. I will just say this. Producer Chris has just forwarded me along. I couldn't find the co-player of the week that you shared the honor with. It was a future Ranger great. It was Ben Broussard. And there's a funny story about Ben Broussard because Ron Washington absolutely had to have Ben Broussard as his first baseman. I don't know if it was the Louisiana connection or what, but Ron Washington came in 2007, and that was the guy he wanted to at first base to replace when Mark Teixeira left. And Ben Broussard didn't last a month. He could not hit his way out of a paper bag at that point in time. So in 2008, that started the scramble for first baseman. And, I think between 2008 and 2010, you went through Smoke,
Bots.
Chris Davis, Bots, eventually landing on Mitch Moreland.
Mitch Moreland, yep, exactly. So I did. The other thing I really wanted to talk about in this, because I was reading something the other day about the biggest cap you ever wore. And Bruce Bochy wore an 8, and I know you hate talking about this, but Bochy wore an 8 1/8 hat.
Yes.
And when you read about things, it says that you were 8 1/4. Now, and with Evan, what's your cap size? You're not an 8, are you?
No, I have a tiny head. I'm like a 7 and I'm a 7 1/4 or something like that.
Oh, okay. But so what is the true story?
This is anti-bald guy rhetoric.
But I'm just curious, but I read somewhere it said you never wore bigger than an 8. Is that true?
Yes, I never did. Not once.
Where did this all come from then?
You know how it is. The internet's 100% truth. Okay. So remember Matt Rooney pitched for the Tigers.
Yep.
So I said maybe in 04, 03, 04, somewhere in there. He comes out. They go, hey, why don't you guys swap hats? I put his hat on, and I could get both my hands inside the hat.
He was a quarter? He was an 8 1/4?
Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah. Zach would know better because I don't think I ever went over an 8.
So you never had to, because New Era would make hats up to 8. Because Bochy had to have special. Did you have to have your cap specially made? No. Right. Okay.
The thing, the funny story about Bochy and caps is more along the lines of his helmet. He had in Houston, he had to have a specially made helmet because his helmet was so big that, and he came in once and he slammed the helmet down and broke the helmet, and he didn't have a helmet to wear basically because nothing would fit him.
Okay. Well, I did want to clear
He looks
up.
like he's got like a big, when you see him, it just looks like it's a big. Maybe that's the feeling that John gets looking at your head, Evan. That it looks bigger.
I kind of do. I mean, it's just like, I guess I've,
I'm just reporting John to HR for all this anti-bald rhetoric.
Okay.
Oh my goodness.
So Menchie, what do you remember most about your time with the Rangers? What was that? I mean, that it was a dysfunctional era in club history.
But he was there 2004, which was a kind of a magical season. So.
But what was that? I mean, what was that whole time like?
Can I plead the fifth?
No, we're not going to let you plead the fifth here. There's no crimes.
Gosh. I know, Buck and I always butted heads. He just, he wanted to control everything, right? You knew how it was, when they let John go, when they let Donnie Kalkstein go, the guys that were there, they'd come up, Hank, Mikey, see who else was in that whole group. That core of young guys that were there that knew these guys, we had been around them, and you guys are getting pushed out. We're like, all right, what's going on here? And we had heard stories from when he was in Arizona because a teammate of mine from Delaware played with him and kind of warned us of what was coming, of how things were, right? It's a control thing, and that's what his biggest thing was. Evan, you remember when he was there, he had everybody weigh in every day, and he made it such a big deal about it. And I wouldn't weigh in. I would just go out there and warming up before the game, and I'd walk in the dugout. He's like, Mench, you gonna weigh in? I'm like, no, I just keep walking.
All I know is it was a very weird time in club history. Buck
but
was.
let's talk about the positive a little bit. 2004. How did it all come together then in your mind? You guys had a great bullpen. You had good young players. And that was a fun season for you guys, right?
Yeah, that was basically what it was. We had fun. I mean, we were in it until I think the last week of the season. We were a group that played well together. We had fun together, and we were young. You don't think about much when you're young, and that was the biggest thing. We were winning ball games with guys doing little stuff, stuff you don't see anymore, right? And the guys weren't hitting 3-run homers. We're getting, base, 2-run doubles and stuff, 2-out hits. Mikey with, shooting balls over first base. We're winning games and stuff with that pitching and defense, which was, and that as well, and it just makes it fun, right? When you're winning, it's a lot better than those long 3.5, 4-hour nights out there when you're getting your teeth kicked in. So, you have fun. The fans were in it, which made it even better, right? It had that atmosphere, and it was great.
It was a fun season. And it was a fun season because it was so unexpected. Most of the predictions around the 2004 season, which was the year that the Rangers traded Alex Rodriguez, really on the cusp of spring training. You went to camp, and there were 2 second basemen and no shortstop the first day of workouts. It was all very, very weird, and and in the end, what ended up happening was Michael Jung took control of the team, and it was a great step for the organization for a generation, and I'd say for more than a generation. You had guys like David DeLucci who really had fire and really played hard and understood Buck and knew what mattered to Buck. You had some great young talents like Mark Teixeira, who really emerged in 2004 after a strong 2003 rookie season. And it did really, really surprise the fans. And I think, to me, again, that's when expectations are high and you win, there's no real buildup. It's like fans show up and they expect you to win, and every loss is a disappointment. With that team, everything was such a surprise that it was a joy to watch, and it was a joy right up until, and John and I had Rod Barajas on just a couple of weeks ago. It was a joy to watch right up until that seat went into the stadium seats in Oakland, and but it was a team that was wired tight. It was a team that played together well, and it really outperformed all the expectations. And I think there were some real long-term ramifications that came from that season. Number one being that this became Michael Jung's organization.
Yep, I would agree with that. And it took a while to get back there, and by that time, Minchie was long gone, but he did re-sign as a minor leaguer late in his career after he came back from Japan. And we're thrilled that you can remember so much about 2006 and that streak, because it's still a major league record, and one that was well deserved. So thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime, guys. I'm always ready here to talk about anything you need to.
We appreciate it. So
yes, sir.
So we'll get back on our next segment. Will be the Archives in Arlington, and we're going to talk about some early season managerial changes with the Rangers when we come back. Kevin Mench, as always, had a lot to say and very talkative, and it was great to remember that streak. But let's go back farther in the Archives in Arlington. And this has been an unusual year so far in Major League Baseball. You've already had 2 teams, the Red Sox and the Phillies, change managers in the month of April. And the Rangers never changed managers in the month of April. One of the first things we never did on the negative side. But we changed managers twice in May. And Doug Rader was fired on May 16th, 1985. When the Rangers were in Chicago. We've talked about this before. Club was 9-23. It was a more than justifiable firing. Club hired Bobby Valentine, who would go on to manage the team till 1992. But the earliest change in a Ranger manager occurred in 2001. It was May 4th, 2001. Johnny Oates, who had led the Rangers to three division titles in 4 years, stepped down as the team's manager, with the club 11-17 and already 11 games behind the Seattle Mariners, who won 116 games that year. And Evan, it was probably, and while Johnny kind of stepped down on his own volition, I think most people will remember that he would probably wouldn't have been too long before that would not have been a voluntary departure.
Yeah, it was unfortunate. Listen, I don't think Johnny was not suited for a team that was going to be so centered around one player as that team was going to be with Alex Rodriguez. And there were a lot of big personalities there, with Rafi still there and with Ivan Rodriguez still there. And then the pitching staff just was non-competitive. I think it was the worst pitching staff in club history with a 5.71 staff ERA.
And you look at the starters on that staff. The Doug Davis was at 4.45, and everybody else ERA was over 5.5. It was just, and we talk a little bit about the previous offseason. That was the year, as Evan mentioned, the Rangers signed Alex Rodriguez. They also signed Andres Galarraga and Kem Cannonini, who were going to help the offense, which didn't do anything, but they really didn't add much pitching in the offseason. And they were, Rafi Palmeiro hit over 40 home runs. I mean, they had a lot of power, hit a lot of home runs, but not a very functional team out of the gate.
And the big pitching move of the offseason was adding Mark Petkazik as a reliever, and that did not work out at all. I believe he posted almost a 7 ERA in relief. And then you had the season starting in Puerto Rico, and that was more of a show than it was baseball. You had
a new owner too that came in the middle of Johnny's tenure. Johnny Oates and Tom Hicks were about as different as you could be. Johnny had to win the division in '98 to get that contract extension for the next year. There was the issue in Cooperstown in 1999 where Tom came out and said the Rangers we need to have the second best record in the league or whatever it was, and that bristled with Johnny a little bit. And then a lot of stuff that happened in 2000 with Loaiza and the firing of Dick Bosman. And I think Johnny, even in that offseason, I think he was not convinced he should come back for 2001, and he and Doug Melvin talked about it, and ultimately he did come back. But he just never felt like it was going to be a good fit going forward.
No, it just in no way was it a good fit. And look, the Rangers were really in a transitional period at that point because, again, in 2000 or after the 99 season, and it's funny, I wanted to talk to David Cohn at the game the other day. I just wanted to relive the 99 playoffs because it was so evident at that point in time that the Yankees were just a superior team than what the Rangers could potentially offensively produce, and that led to the trade of Juan Gonzalez and rebuilding the team around Gabe Kapler and Justin Thompson and Ruben Mateo,
Frank Cavallinato, and everybody else.
Yeah, and none of that worked. And then the Tom wanted to go for the quick fix in 2000 after that season, after a 90-loss season, and it led to signing two older guys, Galarraga and Caminiti, putting all that money into Alex and really outbidding himself for Alex and leaving this team very star-laden, but with no depth. And it just backfired. And I think like you say, John, you knew Johnny better than I did, but I think it was very evident very early on that Johnny was not comfortable. He wasn't comfortable with Alex doing that initial press conference in Port Charlotte on the top of a dugout as a star. He wasn't comfortable with the whole idea that Alex Rodriguez was, going to be the centerpiece of the club. And just the whole, I think there had been some, I don't want to say animus, but I think that there had been some feelings calcified over what he needed to do in 98 after Tom bought the club to hold on to his job, as you mentioned.
Yep.
And I think it had just grown to a point. And look, all things considered, for what eventually became the case, because it was the fall of 2001 when Johnny was diagnosed, unfortunately, with that brain tumor. Hopefully he got more time to spend with Gloria and his family back in Virginia after that. After leaving the Rangers, and that's time that you couldn't ever get back. So it was unfortunate the way that whole thing played out. I remember there was a time in late April I had asked about something that had gone wrong. Again, I think it was with the bullpen or with the rotation, and Johnny was very, very short, and then said something as he left the interview room about thank you very little, kind of sarcastically, and I was like, this is not the Johnny Oates that I know, and so, I think it was for the best that he ended up stepping away. And I think he knew it. I don't think he was going to stand there and be fired. He knew it was time for him to go. And he was probably right. This organization needed to go through a lot more transition.
And Jerry Narron, who was his loyal bench third base coach, got the job, went 62-72. That club finished 43 games behind the Mariners that year. Jerry, and then Doug Melvin gets let go at the end of at the end of the season, and John Hart comes in. Jerry lasts for one more year, and it was kind of a sad ending for me personally for that run that we had. And the other thing that I failed to mention was Rusty Greer got hurt too in 2001. Rusty was a big part of that, the glue as the team moved on, right? I mean, because so many of those other guys had become free agents and everything. But it was tough, and luckily we were able to have Johnny come in for his Hall of Fame induction in 2003 before he passed. But I think the 90s, as we've talked about, will always have a place in Ranger fans' hearts.
It really should. And I would like at some point in time, I would love for us to have Jerry Narron on the podcast as a baseball lifer to just talk about some of the things he's witnessed. And listen, he was a really calming presence in the Rangers clubhouse as Johnny's bench coach and third base coach on occasion. I don't think he was dealt a fair hand as the Rangers manager. And I'd love to get his take on what it was like for that year and a half there that he ended up managing this team.
But that's kind of the summary of Ranger. Of course, we had a lot of in-season firings later in the season, but those were the two earliest ever in club history. So we thank you for joining us on this week's episode of Sports Day Rangers, and thanks again to Kevin Mench. Always a breath of fresh air. And comparing head sizes with him and Evan.
Yeah, there's not much comparison. We both have fairly normal-sized heads. You just, because you are not follically challenged, you choose to pick on those of us who lost their hair at an early age. And I find that to be very hurtful. And I'm going to talk to the HR department of the Sports Day Rangers podcast.
Okay, you do that. And you've got Rangers got a road trip coming up too. Again, the grind doesn't end. They've got to go to Detroit and New York here. And Evan will be talking to you probably from New York next week.
Absolutely, John. Until then, though, everybody, thanks for listening. You know where you can find me. Take care.